All right. It looks like it is recording. I think you can see from your end too. It
Yeah, let
usually
me just
tells you.
double check. Perfect. I've actually done an entire video interview and it didn't record.
Oh, I'm so
We had to
sorry.
redo it. That was with Tony Reinhardt, by the way, one of the speakers at the
Oh,
summit.
yes.
I felt so
Oh,
bad.
especially if it was a good one, right? And you're
Yeah.
like, yes. Oh boy.
Yeah. So that is so good. So that's
It
what I
happened.
do too for people that I interview. I'm like, you see that little recording thing, right? I just want to double check.
There it is.
Yeah.
We're
So
on the
that's
same
a good
page.
practice. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so if you're ready, I'll just take a little pause and then we'll jump right in.
Let's do it.
Hi, Laura. I am so excited to have you on this podcast. And we have had the opportunity to meet each other through our Get in the Lifeboat Summit. And it was fabulous. And your presentation was just wonderful. I actually have the title written down here. It's Long Distance Caregiving, What You Can Do. So you are just the perfect person to be on our podcast to talk about what it is like to be a long distance caregiver and also a daughter of somebody that has memory impairment. So welcome to the episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. And I love that you asked me to speak on your podcast because I think that there are a lot of long distance daughters that don't really have a voice in the dementia industry. And I feel like we really need to. And it helps us to be able to have a voice as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. You are so welcome. Maybe we could start and you could just share with our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do and what you have to offer.
Sure. So I am the CEO and founder of Befriended Heart, and it is a for-purpose business where I help long-distance daughters navigate their parents' dementia. And so I come to this from a personal perspective as well as a professional perspective. And I think that when my dad was diagnosed, I found a lot of experts who came to give me tips from the professional perspective, but I was really missing that empathetic, down to earth, positive and practical advice that I really needed. And a lot of my friends, I was about 28 when my dad was diagnosed. So a lot of my friends had not even been in that situation. And I really just wanted someone to just sit next to me, hold my hand, and help me through it. And so I thought to start this business soon after my dad was diagnosed with dementia several years ago. And it's so great now because my dad actually just passed away a couple months ago. And I feel like Befriended Heart is really continuing his legacy. And the idea behind Befriended Heart is to discover joy in dementia. And that doesn't mean that everything is great. That's absolutely not what I mean, because I've been through it and I know that there's a lot of devastation, there's a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of change that we hate, that we're uncomfortable with, that we've never, ever expected. But the reality is that it's dementia. There is no cure. There are a few treatments, but you can't stop the progression of dementia. And there's a lot of controversy as far as if you can delay the progression of dementia. So that's the reality. And the question is, how can we make the best of this? And I found that soon after my dad passed and I was talking to some family members about their favorite memories of him, that was his philosophy in life. And so I didn't realize that I had adopted that myself, but that just shows how important the values were that he passed on to me, and that I am trying to share with the world, with something that is so difficult for people to grasp as far as publicly, and also even in our social relationships, it's hard for people to grasp because there's so much fear there. And so we really need some help and guidance through that.
Absolutely. You know what, one of the things that I just love about what you're doing is, and you touched on this a little bit, is that there are so many professionals out there, and they all have great experience and advice and guidance, and it's so hard for people that are in the midst of this, whether they are just learning about a diagnosis, or they just have concerns, or they're in the thick of it, you know. Um, but to have somebody that they can be getting information from a perspective of personal, that's just so valuable. I'm a licensed mental health professional, and one of the things that we know is that by surrounding yourself or being in a community where others have gone through similar experiences, there's a level of healing, a level of support that just isn't met anywhere else. So wonderful. I just think that's great, Laura.
Yeah, and I think too that when even before the thick of it and when you're worried about a diagnosis, one of the problems, and this is something that I'm seeing kind of leads into the next question,
Yeah.
that there's so many resources, there's so many things that it gets so overwhelming, especially for the primary caregiver, or I call it the caregiving parent, who is taking care of the forgetful parent. And it's so hard to just sort through, like, oh my God, what do I even do first?
Right.
And so that's also something that I do as well. I try to do a step-by-step process, so it's a little bit easier to wrap our minds around and then feel accomplished after we finish each step.
I love that. Again, when we look at the emotional hit of being faced with the possibility or the reality of a diagnosis, and then we're trying to navigate, a family member is trying to navigate the medical, the financial, the making decisions about, oh my gosh, everything from what to eat, what do I feed my loved one? Is there food that's going to help them, to drawing in your resources? I mean, it can be just completely overwhelming. And one of the things that you had said earlier too, and I want to talk more about this overwhelming piece of too much information.
Totally. Yeah.
One of the things that you said that just stuck with me, and I just want to highlight it because it was so beautiful, the piece that you learned from your dad and how you carried that over, that piece of how can we make the best of the situation. Because I do believe that just as human beings, we just want to do the right thing. We want to make the right decision. We want to do the right thing for ourselves and our loved ones and our families. And so the fact that your focus is on how can we make the best of this, knowing that it's not easy. It is tough. How do you talk to families about that piece?
I think it's really important I think that empathy is just so essential. And, it's really important to tell them, I understand, I've been through it. And part of it too is that it's important to sit with those feelings and recognize that there can be joys in each day. There can be joys when you spend time with your forgetful parent or your caregiving parent. I think that it's really difficult when your thoughts are racing towards the future, where you're worried that your forgetful parent is going to pass away. And I remember when I would visit my parents, because I was definitely long distance, at least geographically. So I was about 3.5 hours away from my parents driving. And I'm here in DC, and they were in Pennsylvania. And it was really difficult for me because I would visit my parents and I would notice that my dad suddenly had another loss that I wasn't, again, like, it's completely unpredictable. It's like this terrible roller coaster that you're stuck on for however many years that dementia lasts. So it was the downward force of the roller coaster at that point. And I remember he started losing his words, so fairly early in the diagnosis. And it's unique for everybody, but this was sort of one of his first symptoms. And I noticed that he would have trouble finishing a sentence, but he could come up with the beginning of the sentence. And so my focus was, oh my God, I can't believe he can't finish the sentence. He's gonna, and I was looking up things about dementia and lifespan and all that stuff. So I was really like living in the future. And then I visited, maybe 6 months after that, or maybe a year after that. I can't remember exactly, because it all ends up blending together. And I'm sure you guys understand what I mean by that. But the next time he could only come up with like a few words in the beginning of the sentence. And I remember thinking to myself, Laura, if you had just lived in the moment when he wasn't able to finish his sentence, and you were able to appreciate that he could still speak these words, you could have taken advantage of that time and been happy in that moment. But instead, you were focused on what was lost and not what he still had. And so that was a huge lesson for me. And that's what I try to talk to caregivers about, because I think it's really difficult to appreciate what we have until we don't have it. And it's that's why I think it's super important. And I'll talk about this a little later for taking care of myself, but mindfulness meditation helps a lot with this, because it helps you get grounded again in the present moment and not let your thoughts carry you away to the future or back to the past with regrets. So that's a really long answer to your question, but
and it's so valuable. I mean, really, one of the things that people experience that you touched on is just that sense of overwhelm with too much information, and that puts you in your mind. And I'm really excited to talk to you about mindfulness, because what happens is it's partially a safety mechanism for us, a coping skill, if you will, to busy ourselves, to just, if we're busy, then we're doing something, we're taking some action, and then often people just spin in circles. With that said, it is so important to educate ourselves and have folks have the information they need. And there's a fine balance, right, between distraction and overwhelm with information, and being able to take in information in a way that is going to be the most helpful. And so let's jump into the mindfulness piece, because I think that really is key here.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. And I'm really curious when and where and how you came to value this idea of mindfulness.
Yeah, so I was first introduced to mindfulness meditation, or just the idea of mindfulness, in college through it was sort of like a support group, as a set of people that were all college students, and we were trying to manage the stress of, college relationships, like romantic relationships, and all the work and all of that. So that was my first introduction, and I thought it was such a different way. I think when we all think about meditation, the stereotype is we say and we close our eyes and we touch our thumb to our middle finger,
chanting and mantras,
on our knees. Yeah, but there are so many other ways that you can calm your mind, and so that was the first time I was introduced to it. And I sort of fell away from it, as my life progressed, and I ended up coming back. So I have a background in pretty liberal Christianity. And I noticed that while, I was praying for God to help my family and asking for support from people in my church, they also had not had much experience with dementia, and so they would try to be helpful but didn't know how to help. And I found that there's a particular type of mindfulness meditation that really spoke to me, and it is by a monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. He is a Vietnamese monk. He's also a awesome political negotiator by way of compassion and calm. And so what most resonated with me about mindfulness meditation is this acceptance that there is so much suffering in life. And when I heard the word suffering, I never really felt like I was suffering until I entered this dementia journey. I was like, you know what? Suffering really is the best word for what I'm experiencing. And I know that there are some professionals that say, oh, well, you don't want to say, families that are suffering with dementia, but I do, because I've been there and we were suffering,
And there's power in naming it too.
Absolutely.
There's something that happens when we can put a name or a label on it that externalizes it, so that then we can manipulate it. We can work with it then. We can understand it better.
Yeah. So and I'm sure you all feel this way too. I mean, it's not just sadness. It's not just frustration. It's not just being, surprised by bad things. I think suffering is a really great name for all of that. And it also brings to mind the severity of what we're feeling too. And so I've found that through mindfulness meditation, you are aware of the suffering that this is causing. And this is, while you're aware of it and you're recognizing these negative feelings or unpleasant feelings, there are also some positive feelings to life. There are also some positive feelings to your day, even if it's something as small as, I wore my super comfortable shirt today and I was able to do that, because I didn't have to go out of the house. So that's something that's important to me. Another thing too is that I think a lot of times in dementia, we feel so helpless, like we can't do anything. And so one thing that we can do that I mentioned a little bit earlier is that we can actually end up managing our thoughts. And I like to call meditation for me a mental vacation, because it really does give your brain a break from rushing all around. As Laura said, it also comes from the survival instinct of us trying to figure out okay, do we freeze, flee, or what's the other word?
What is it?
Freeze, flight or fright. So we totally have to edit that out. Okay. So it's it comes from the survival aspect of our brains. It's fight or flight. And through meditation, you're silencing that part. And what we find in science is we can only 100% focus on one thing. I know that we do a lot of multitasking, but we're not focusing 100% on one thing when we do that. And so mindfulness meditation teaches you to really be present. We have trillions of nerves in our body. And so we get in touch with what those nerves are feeling. So is it our feet on the ground? Is it our breath? And by focusing 100% of our attention on that, our mind is not able to think about the future or the past. And that's why they call it a practice, because it does take practice, just like practicing an instrument or practicing singing or voice lessons, but it will so pay off, because I feel like this is the main thing that got me through my dad's diagnosis and through it, since he passed away. And I'm still doing it. Yeah.
I love that. And one of the things that I think really is a distinction between meditation and mindfulness, and especially for our caregivers, is meditation is a practice in which you really set aside time, and that's something that so many caregivers, as you know so well, people don't have time. They often do not have time to sit down for 20 minutes twice a day and breathe. And it would be wonderful if they did, and it would benefit so many. However, mindfulness and what you're speaking of is an opportunity for folks to tap into that meditative piece anytime throughout the day. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, as a caregiver, really, whether you're at a distance or you're living with the person that has memory impairment, give us a couple examples of how you might incorporate mindfulness in the middle of a busy or chaotic day.
Sure. So I think it depends on what soothes you, I think. So for me, I like anything involved with water.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so I know that when I am washing dishes or something, I will focus on the feel of the water. I will focus on the smoothness of the plates. It's very focused on your senses, because as I mentioned, we have trillions of nerves, but our brain is constantly going, our thoughts are constantly racing, that we're not paying attention to what we're feeling. And it's just, I mean, it's fascinating how many senses we can use for our environment and things like that. You can basically, so focus on your nerves, but then be passive by just going by what you feel.
Oh,
And like, as far as the sensations. So like I said, washing the dishes,
I
or
love that example. Yeah.
lighting a candle and smelling it, and just soaking in, feeling the candle with your hands, the wax and how soft it is, and then lighting the like feeling the wick and then lighting the candle and smelling it. And this sounds like you're like, of course I've lit a candle before. But
But have you? Have you
yeah,
really?
but this is really letting yourself fall into the full experience of living, and how our human experience is so much more than worrying about the future or regretting the past. It's about, how are we going to spend this day? How are we, these trillions of nerves, like, are we just going to waste them and then, have
Right.
that life pass us by? Or are we going to appreciate the fact that we can still breathe, that, especially with right now, this is being taped during coronavirus. There are some people that it's difficult for them to take breaths, and you're able to
Yes.
walk. And it's really important that we remember what we do have, because it's very easy to remember what we're losing.
Mm. Oh, that's wonderful. And I'm also thinking about how beneficial it is to others when you are more grounded or present within yourself. So as a distant caregiver, talk a little bit about that. How is being mindful for a distant caregiver going to help the primary caregiver or the person that has memory impairment?
Oh my gosh, Laura. So I didn't really start seriously practicing mindfulness until about a year ago. And, my dad passed away recently. So I so wish that I could have started this ideally right when our dementia journey began, because there are so many things that I said to my mom in my fear and my frustration that I wasn't able to help, that I wasn't mindfully saying those things. I was reacting versus responding. And I think when we are in crisis mode, it's so easy to be reactive. And that's where so much of the hurt and the pain comes from. Because there is a certain level of suffering that comes when the dementia diagnosis is made, but then what is said or what is done can actually make it even harder and cause more suffering. So I think it's really important that, I know for me, it was very helpful for me to have my own therapist. It's like super important for me to have my own therapist, because that I was able to basically vent to her about my experience, and then talk with my mom about what her experience has been. And even that was still very difficult for me, because I'm an only child, and a lot of the responsibility in the beginning fell to me, because my mom was not ready yet to to deal with the diagnosis of dementia. And so I needed to take some steps ahead to feel like I could be helpful and like something was being done. And so I think, sorry, I forgot what the question was.
Well, I'm thinking about how valuable the practice of mindfulness is as a distant caregiver.
Yes. So I think we learned that if you've been watching, dementia videos or listening to experts like Laura, that the way that we behave or that we speak, like the tone of voice or our attitude, is our forgetful parent can reflect that automatically. And it's the same with our caregiving parent. So our caregiving parent is pretty much going to be exhausted and, at their wit's end when you visit. And so it's so important to really try to reflect individually before you visit. And I know I actually did that very well, even without mindfulness. Is I really tried to be in touch with my feelings that I was feeling and validate them and say, okay, I'm feeling this way. And I am going to, act like I have it all together with my parents because they need someone to have it all together, And so, so I think it helped me be more calm and be more positive. I think positivity is super important if you're coming to visit. I think speaking with a lot of caregiving parents, it seems like the long distance daughter or son can come and say, oh, well, you're doing this wrong. And I definitely did that. I admit it. I definitely did it because that was my way of thinking that I was helping. And, but I think that the mindfulness would help in helping you realize what your intention is before you actually have a conversation with your parents, and also being resilient to something unpredicted that's going to happen because it probably will.
And, it's a journey, right? I mean, I think the one thing I say over and over to the families I work with, but really to myself too, is just be gentle with yourself. We do not have all the answers. We're figuring this out. We're human. And so having that compassion, having that kindness towards ourselves is really important. And I love this conversation, Laura, because you're on the other end. So many people are at the beginning of this journey or in the middle of this journey, and hearing your reflections about what was helpful and what you wish you would have done different and what you've learned. I mean, this is valuable. And while every person is not the same, and people are all going to go through this journey differently, the information that you share is an opportunity for people to reach, try this or that, or maybe it's not the right time now, but revisit it later. I think is just really, really important. I wanted to ask a question about if there was one thing or two things that you wish that all caregivers knew, what would that be? And I might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but what do you wish that all caregivers could know?
Yeah, so I think when we left the neuropsychologist's office, and he told me that my dad had mild cognitive impairment and that it could be leaning towards frontal temporal dementia, I ended up looking up FTD on Google, and it said, what the life expectancy was. And I was immediately devastated. And I felt that I think a lot of society tells us that when you have a diagnosis of dementia, it's the end. It's the end of happiness. It's the end of your wonderful family life. It's the end of the future that you had pictured. I was only in my late 20s. I hadn't even gotten married yet. I hadn't even had kids yet, And so the thing is, it's not the end. And I know that primary caregivers know this because it can go on for very long. But what I mean is that it's not the end to joy in your life, and that it is instead the opportunity to find joy in a new relationship with your parents, a deeper relationship with your parents and with yourself. And in this process, it's important to remember what you can control.
That is very helpful. Thank you very much, really. Yeah.
Sure.
And just to round it all back to what we can control, this tool, this gift of using mindfulness really just brings that point home, for sure.
Absolutely. So it's controlling your thoughts, which then controls what you do and your actions and the consequences. So it all is connected. And I think too, I know you were talking about, Laura, how we want to be busy, and there are some productive ways that we can be busy. So I think that long distance daughters, we're told a lot by, I did a lot of research on this before starting Befriended Heart. And I feel like a lot of healthcare resources tell long distance daughters, or, secondary caregivers is what we're known as, to kind of stay out of it and leave the primary caregiver to do what they need to do. But you and I know now that the research shows that primary caregivers have too much of a burden. I mean, they're expected to do all of these things day to day. They're constantly overwhelmed. Oh, and by the way, find some time for self-care. That's your responsibility, right?
Right.
And that's just so unfair.
Yeah.
And it's so unrealistic. So what I was thinking, and this was my experience too, where I was just like, you know what? I know that I felt super helpless as a long distance daughter, and I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. And my mom didn't know what to tell me, and none of the healthcare resources know what to tell me. So I think there are things that we can do as long distance daughters, and that there can actually be a benefit to being long distance. I know emotionally it feels like you're not able to be close with your forgetful parent, that you might be missing out on memories since you're not there. But because we are not there on a day-to-day basis, I would actually argue that it's easier for us to see changes or, trends or things that we notice about our forgetful parent or our caregiving parent. And we are actually able to think about the future in a productive, practical way. So, if you do get the mild cognitive impairment, this might be a good time to start talking about getting a financial advisor, getting an elder law attorney to start talking about the will, because I know that this can sound depressing, and there's definitely an aspect of it which is depressing, but it's important to focus on this being the time that your forgetful parent can actually say what they want, right? Because if you think about my dad, one of the first things he lost was his words. And so we had to kind of guess, okay, well, what would he want, in the future? And we ended up doing that, probably early on into his diagnosis. And we felt good about it because at least he signed it and he was understanding it, And so I think, as I mentioned before, is taking advantage and finding the joy in this. You can provide your forgetful parent the joy of being able to say what they want in the future for their medical care.
I love that. Yes. And I just want to really emphasize what you're saying. The families that I've worked with over the years that have waited to either get their power of attorney documents finished or finish their advance directives or living wills, the tremendous burden that families experience trying to make those decisions without the input of their loved one can be overwhelming. I've seen it over and over. And so as uncomfortable as it is, and you touched on that, it is uncomfortable, and it doesn't take long. Just setting aside a little bit of time to get those wishes down and to be really clear about some things moving forward is going to bring an enormous amount of relief in the future if or when those decisions need to be made. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I do want to add too, since my dad passed away, we thought we had gotten all of our ducks in a row, as far as paperwork goes and things like that. But apparently we forgot to transfer my dad's title over to my mom. So it was only under his name. And so she has spent my dad passed away at the end of January. She has
title for his car, or title for the house?
Title for the car. Yeah.
Oh, got ya. Okay.
So yeah, it's May now. So my mom is still trying to get the title, and it's been, a headache because she's now moved to Virginia and she used to live in Pennsylvania. And then there's the bureaucracy of Pennsylvania and Virginia. And she's just this is just making my grief so much worse. Yeah. And, and we are thinking, wow, we really wish that we remembered to transfer the title. And luckily we did all of the other things, which is awesome. And that's why we're not in a worse place emotionally right now. But just speaking to what Laura just mentioned, this is an example of something where, you are kind of unwittingly extending the suffering of your parent passing away and of the dementia, right? So it does take a little bit of time up front, but it saves you a lot of suffering in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And be gentle with yourself.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask if is there anything else that you would like to share that you think would be important for long distance caregivers or daughters?
Yeah. So I do want to say, I know I'm talking a lot about suffering, and I just want to say how that's defined, because I know I was talking to my mom about it and she's like, I'm not suffering, everything's, I'm just sad. So the idea of suffering with mindfulness meditation by Thich Nhat Hanh is suffering is anything that is anxiety, frustration, anything that feels unpleasant to us. So, and then joy is anything that's pleasant. And so the idea is you want to be present with all of those feelings, because it ends up being even harder when we are trying to gloss over some of those negative feelings, because that's what society teaches us to do. And we don't embrace those feelings and listen to those feelings and comfort those feelings. And that's, I think, why therapy works really well, because we get that validation from our therapist. We can also do it for ourselves too. And so what I do every morning is I, do some mindfulness meditation, and I say, hey, Laura, how are you feeling today? And this is before the movie Inside Out came out. And I have, little feelings that sit around this board table, and, whatever comes up first. So it's I feel annoyed today because my neighbor was deciding to hammer nails in the wall this morning. And, that actually happened. And then, and then I say, after that, I say, okay, is there anything else that you're annoyed about? So then I'll let annoy do their whole list. And then I say, all of the feelings around the table say we love you, annoyed, and then the next feeling talks, so whatever is coming up. And it's important for me. I notice that fear and anger, I tend not to give them a voice, because society tells us that we need to shove it down, but that's what causes issues. And so I really make a point to say, am I feeling fear? Am I scared? Whatever word comes up for me at that point, and really embracing it. So I think that's super important. I think that's a way that we can be gentle with ourselves and also move productively into the day. And really, I noticed that once I give those unpleasant feelings a voice, they don't come up later in the day and cause me to say something or do something hurtful. So,
have you heard the term "what you resist persists"?
Yes.
So this is such a great example that you're giving of by suppressing and not honoring all parts of yourself, even the ugly parts or the parts that we're told are not good, like the anger. The more we suppress them, the more power they really have to come out and affect us later. And so I just love your practice of setting aside time to honor all of those voices, to honor all of those feelings, to give space so that they don't have the power to overrule us later at the most opportune moments, usually.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, you don't even know that it's coming out, but my husband will tell me. Like, did you do mindfulness today? Because, and I'm like, no, I didn't. Yeah. And I think too, it's important, Laura, to mention that, like, if you can just take a couple minutes away and breathe and just think about how you're feeling and say, I love you, whatever the feeling is, and breathe, take a deep breath and then move forward in what you need to do, because that's a way of grounding ourselves in the present moment. As I said before, that's a way to ground ourselves in the present moment. So we're not thinking about the future, or we're not, stuck in our frustration and acting out in our frustration or our sadness. Yeah. So
one of my new mantras is, we are not our emotions. I am not my feelings. And I think that as human beings, we often forget that. Feelings and emotions are so powerful. They drive our decision-making process. They drive our reaction process. And it's sort of reminding us that we are the master of our thoughts and our feelings, not the other way around. And boy, what a paradigm shift, right? And
absolutely,
I'm by no means the master of that.
Right.
But I'm constantly reminding myself of that.
Yeah, especially when we all feel like we're being controlled by dementia, And so it was so important for me to empower myself in this situation. And that's what I really strive to do for long distance daughters experiencing this. And so I want to share the resource that you alluded to a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
So I have a PDF guide. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Choosing the Best Professional Care Team. And it really talks about how to find and questions to ask when you are interviewing professionals like an elder law attorney, a financial advisor, even a geriatrician, or a home care agency. So definitely check out that guide. It is free, and would love it if you were able to use that, because I know I used a similar process. It was not nearly as organized and pretty as what I created for you, but I based the guide on my personal experience in finding professionals for my parents, and also my professional experience knowing what the industry best practices are and the benchmarks of excellent care. So if you can check that out, will.
Where can people find that? I will also include a link. But
yeah, perfect. So my website is called joyindementia.com, and that's all one word. And actually, right when you put in the joyindementia.com, it will come up, like the first screen that comes up is downloading that guide.
Wonderful. What an amazing resource. I mean, to have somebody that has really gone through all of the work and hardship and struggle of trying to find these appropriate resources, and then and it sounds like, and I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm going to when I get off, it sounds like what you've done is you've just really distilled it out into clear steps, which, boy, I mean, that's what our caregivers need, is just
tell me about it.
I know what to do.
Yeah. I just needed positivity and practicality. And so that's what I try to create. And I also made it very much a hands-on guide. So I ask questions, you can write down the information. And it's really cool, I think, for long distance daughters, because it's a packet that you can do for however much time you have, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. and you can write down what the results have been. And then when you go back to the packet, if it's like a week or 2 weeks later, you know where you left off.
Love that. I love that. So it's not something you have to do, set aside time and do all at once. You've created it so that it's a working tool as you move forward. That's great,
Absolutely.
Laura. Yay. Well, I have been so honored to get to know you better, and I'm so pleased to be able to share your work to all of our listeners. As you know, it is so rare to find people who specialize in the world of dementia. And our caregivers spend a lot of time just trying to sift and sort and find those professionals or those people that have experience. And so I am just so happy to bring you here to this platform so that people can know about the work that you do. Actually, and I should ask, you have this amazing guide, so thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else that you do where you offer where people might be able to get more access to you and your work?
Yeah, so that is what I have for now, but I have a online course planned to hopefully launch this year about early stage dementia. So all the things that long distance daughters need to know about early stage, in addition to kind of what you can read online, but also how to navigate your new relationship with your caregiving parent and things like that are not always talked about when you're reading about early stage dementia. And I'll talk about my personal experience as well as my professional experience. And so I'm excited for that.
So we'll be definitely looking forward to that. Oh,
absolutely. Great. And two, I know that there are some caregiving parents and primary caregivers listening to this. I think that if you feel like you need a lot of help and you're overwhelmed and you're like, I don't even have time to look for these professionals, which I totally get because I know my mom was in those shoes, that you can, if there is a long distance daughter or son or some other relative that wants to help, this is a great way that they can help you. Because one of the things that I made very clear in this guide is we are providing, once you fill out this guide, you provide suggestion of 3 professionals. And the person that makes the final decision is that caregiving parent or the primary caregiver. So basically, for my mom, I was narrowing down all of this searching and all of this process to where she could just make a decision based on these 3 people. I provided the information and made a recommendation. So if you are feeling as a primary caregiver, there's no way you can do this, think about who you could delegate to help you with this and send them to my site.
I love that. No, this is a great resource, Laura, really. As you can imagine, the number of families that say, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. My daughter, my loved one, my family member wants to help, and I don't even know what to tell them to do. I can't even begin to task them with something. And so this is just a wonderful resource for them to hand over so that they can access your work and get some solid direction. So, thank you.
Yeah. So definitely sign up for it. And thank you so much, Laura, for having me on your podcast. It was really an honor to also get to know you better and chat with your audience too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And we really look forward to talking with you in the future and hearing more about your program.
Sounds great.
So, all right. Take care.
You too.